Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. It's True Crime with Jess Rose. I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Tuesdays are my request evening. Thursdays, stories that I like to bring to you. I'm also over on the TikTok, which is Jess Rose 5472, or you could join my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Jess Rose 5472. Or you could subscribe, be amazing, or you could just watch. Just watch. That'd be great. That'll be just as good. So, story tonight. It's called The Heartbreaking Nixzmary Brown Story. And it really is. I've done some horrific stories lately. I genuinely have. But this goes back to a comment that I made probably 2 or 3 stories ago about what's going on, what went on in the 90s in New York. It was like there was just a spate of these child abuse cases that it was like child services just couldn't get their act together. And tonight's story is no different, but it's not the 90s. We're into the 2000s in this story. You had Lisa Steinberg back in 87. I've covered her story. We've got Nadine Lockwood, Elisa Escardo. Now, I haven't done those 2 stories, but they are also from the 90s in New York, and it just seems like there was just something going on with the child services. It was just, I don't know what it was, but I can't just say it was New York. I think it just seems that way, but I think you can see the stories I've done since I started this channel, and it spans so many decades, different continents. It just seems there are evil people out there that just seem to target the most innocent amongst us. And I just, as I've said before, I can't wait until I don't have any of these stories to do anymore. It'd be really lovely. But like I say, it's the heartbreaking Nixzmary Brown story. Okay, now we'll start with her mum. Her name is Nixzmary Santiago. Okay, now Nixzmary, okay, she was brought up in Puerto Rico, pronounce that right, I don't know. Came over to America, and she actually has her first child while she's still a teen. She's quite young. Okay, now the first child, she broke up with his dad. All right, now I know he's a boy. I know a couple of the siblings' names. I'm not going to bring them up. I don't need to for the story. Okay, so, but she has got an older brother. But Nixzmary didn't stay with his dad. All right, then she gets with a man called Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman. My goodness, Abdurrahman. And his name's Moyan. His surname's Moyan. Okay. Now she meets this guy. This is in New York. I believe it's Brooklyn. And her mum were looking at a street fight, or her aunt. It might have been her aunt actually. Were looking at a street fight, and he took that as his sort of in to go over and talk to them. And we got chatting to Nixzmary, and they got on, and quite quickly they're in a relationship. But within 6 months she gets pregnant. Okay, now he doesn't want a child at all, and he does kind of push for her to get rid of this baby, and she doesn't want to get rid of this baby at all. So she leaves her mum's and she goes to sort of like a hostel when no one knows where she is. Pretty soon after that, she leaves and she goes to Connecticut. And there she has little Nixzmary. Okay? Now, little Nixzmary, beautiful, beautiful little baby. Really is a gorgeous little child, okay? Now, as I said, she left Abdurrahman because he didn't want a child, so she just sort of disappeared on him. And while in Connecticut, she meets a man. Now, I've seen this man's name. I've seen two names for this man. I've seen Edward and Michael. Now, I'm going to say Michael because that's the name I've seen. Now, I don't know, is he using a middle name? It doesn't say. I've looked. But there's two names being used for him. I'm going to use Michael. All right? So she meets and marries a man by the name of Michael Brown. All right? And of course, she comes in tow with these two little children from two other men, and he doesn't care, and he gives them his last name. I don't know about Nixzmary's older brother, but he certainly gives Nixzmary his surname, hence the reason her surname is Nixzmary Brown. Okay, now the two of them get married and they go on to have two children together. So now Nixzmary has 4 children. Okay, so it's okay for a few years, and he loves Nixzmary. He does, and he treats her as his own. And it's all great for a good few years. It's good for, you know, up until Nixzmary's 5, and then they break up. Okay, so Nixzmary, with her 4 kids, comes back to New York. All right, Brooklyn. And while she's there, this is when she meets Caesar. Now, I'm going to pronounce his name Caesar, but I've heard his name pronounced Cesar. Maybe that, because it has got an apostrophe on the top. Is it Cesar? Caesar. I'm going to say Caesar Rodriguez, okay? Now, this man is known for having a really, really, really bad temper. This man, he really is, all right? Now, they would go on to have 2 kids together. So, at the point of the story we're going to get to eventually, there will be 6 children, 4 different dads, 3 boys and 3 girls, meaning Nixzmary, who is the second oldest of her siblings, has 3 brothers and 2 sisters. The reason I'm spreading it out like that is I found myself getting very confused today. So I've actually spread it out. But bar saying siblings, I'm not going to mention them too much more now. Okay, I just wanted you to know, because Nixzmary adored her siblings. She did, especially the younger one. She really did. You know, she loved nothing more than spending time with them. And now we're going to come up to 2004 when Nixzmary is about 6. Okay? And there's a photo of her. She's got an absolutely beautiful smile. She looks older than 6. I will say that in 2004. She does look older than 6. And I suppose behind that smile you'll realise why. But she's a beautiful little girl. She really is. And it was said that she was outgoing. She loved animals, especially her little cat. She loved her siblings. She loved playing. She loved her friends. Now, it was said by her aunt, it was said that she really wanted to learn English, because at home they all spoke Spanish, and she wanted to be able to converse with her school friends. So she had a friend called Janelle, and Janelle would teach Nixzmary English, and she'd do a little tests and things like that. She really did pick it up really well, and her aunt said, no matter what was in front of her, she'd pick it up and she'd try and read it in English. She was so determined, you know, to be able to I can imagine it being really hard being in a school, not speaking the same as the other kids, the same language, and it would be really, really hard, really hard. So it says something about this little girl that rather than just thinking, oh well I can't, she really tries, and you know, and she does really well. She really does. And she just wanted to communicate with her friends, basically. That's what it was, okay? Now, it was still in 2004. And like I say, though, behind that happy exterior, all right, there was a little girl whose home life was anything but happy. Anything but happy. Now, remember, she'd had, although he wasn't her biological dad, she'd had Michael Brown in her life who had doted on her, doted on his own two, her older brother and her. And, you know, she began her life really, really, and the photos do look like she's genuinely happy, that her really early photos, but the later one, in one of them, she is small and it's Halloween and she's dressed up as like a superhero. Or a Power Ranger, I think. But you can just see there's something behind the eyes, that the smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. And I've said that before. Now, there was a first abuse allegation in May of 2004. All right? It was when the first allegation was brought forward. But apparently there was no proof. There was no proof of this, of it being abuse. Now, we then get to the second abuse allegation, which is December of 04, okay? Now, what it was, she comes to school with a black eye, all right? She's also got a cut on her forehead, all right? Now, one of her siblings says, oh, she hit it on some wood. It was on some wood, but another sibling said, no, I think it's Caesar. I think it was either Caesar or her mum. But because that sibling, when pushed, wouldn't say anymore, they were like, don't know about this. But this young girl's hurt. She's really hurt. So the social worker at the school, a woman by the name of Margarita, okay, she'd been getting more and more concerned about Nixzmary anyway. Because remember I said she was, I've heard the word, vivacious, outgoing, you know, a really sweet little girl. She'd noticed not only had she been becoming more and more reserved and quiet, but she was getting thinner. The bruises, the black eye and the cut on her head weren't the first bruises that Margarita had seen on this child. And she was starting to get really, really concerned. And she made the report to Child Services, and she begged them to remove Nixzmary from the home. She knew she was being hurt. She knew it was going to get bad. And she even went round there herself. And she was stopped by Caesar at the front door, and he was like, look, no one's here and I'm on my way out. So she didn't get past the front door. Her other concern was the amount of time that Nixzmary was missing from school. She was missing an awful lot of time, you know, 40 odd days at this point. Another sewing, you know, and she just begged them. She begged them to get that child out of the home. She did, okay? Now, on the 16th of May 2005, all right, little Nixzmary's age 6, the guidance counsellor then calls the child abuse hotline. So there's so many people calling Child Services again. Here we are again. About all the bruises she keeps seeing on Nixzmary, and the amount of, like I say, the time that was being missed from school. All right. Now, what they did is, rather than investigating it anymore, they accepted what Nixzmary was saying, that she'd be back at school soon. Oh, God. Right. And they just took her word for it. All right. But at home, Nixzmary was going through hell. Okay. She was going through utter hell. And she really was. She really was. She was being beaten on a regular basis. Okay. Now, all the kids in the house feared his temper. All of them did. You know, he could make them all duck. He had a very bad temper. I think he was quite handsy with Nixzmary as well. I think he was, you know, he was quite handy with her. But he'd save, you know, his special time for Nixzmary. You know, she got the special end of his wrath. You know, she just seemed to get it worse and a lot more often. And while this was going on, Nixzmary just would sit back and let it happen. Now, let's remember, if we go back to Abdulrahman, who, you know, she'd been in the relationship with when she'd caught pregnant for Nixzmary. He didn't want a daughter. Well, he didn't want a child. And she thought she finished that relationship and she left. She obviously wanted this child. And now she's watching a man just destroy this little girl in front of her, and she does nothing to help her. Okay. So in December of 2005, all the kids got Christmas presents. All of them. Except Nixzmary. She didn't get anything. She didn't get anything for Christmas. What? I can't imagine what she must have been thinking. Was she blaming herself? Was I don't know. God knows what this little girl must have been thinking. Why me? And also, as with a lot of our stories, she wasn't being fed. So not only is she seeing her siblings getting their Christmas presents, she's watching them get fed like you would normally do with your children. You know, you do have to feed them. And she'd have been seeing that, and she'd have been thinking, why am I being singled out? She's still a baby. And she must have been so confused. She really must have been. Now, Nixzmary didn't have a nice warm bed either, you know, to sleep at night after she'd been beaten and going to bed with no food. But she didn't have a nice warm bed like the other kids had. She was locked in a room, in just a rat-infested spare room in the apartment, okay? And it was tied with like a white rope type thing, and it was one of those door handles that turn, and it was tied. I don't know what it was tied to. I don't know if it was attached to the bathroom. I don't know what it was attached to, but she couldn't get out. She was locked in that bedroom, and all that was in this bedroom was a dirty mattress on the floor, a broken radiator, and an old style school chair. Now, when I say old style school chair, it's the one with the wooden seat and the wooden back, but with a gap in between. So it's metal frame, and then you've got a sort of a round wooden seat and a round wooden frame at the back. That was in the room. And she'd be tied to that quite regularly. Not just by Caesar. No, Mummy Dearest. Mummy Dearest would take part in tying her to that chair with duct tape, rope, zip ties, whatever they could, bungee cords, whatever they could find. She'd be tied to that chair. And she wasn't allowed to use the bathroom, even when she wasn't tied to it. She wasn't allowed to go and use the toilet like everyone else in the apartment. She had to go to the toilet in her cat's litter box. that was her bathroom, that was her toilet. And that's all there was in this bedroom. That's where she was kept for hours, sometimes days, not being fed, not being loved, not a kind word. And then we get to the 11th of January 2006. She's age 7 at this point, okay? And Caesar, he notices his printer's broken, okay? His printer's broken, and his temper flies because his printer's broken, and he interrogates all the kids. Well, of course, who's he going to blame? It's Nixzmary. Now, I have seen on some sources that it was one of the kids that said it was her. You know, it was said on another source that he just zoned in on her. I'd more go with that. But even if it was one of the little kids, they were probably thinking, God, I don't want to get it. You know, it's a child. They're thinking of self-preservation at that point. And she was beaten mercilessly over this printer. But then he notices there's a whole yogurt has been taken out of the fridge. And he's like, who's taken that yogurt? And it was Nixzmary's. Now, when I mentioned it was one of the kids that said she'd broken the printer, you can excuse that. But Nixzmary's, her mum, she was like, she took the yogurt, it was her. She'd already been beaten. This is pretty much all in the same time frame. And she could, I mean, take a rap yourself, for goodness sake. Or better still, why not get your kids out there? But no, it was her. She did it. Wow, this sent him into a really real livid rage now. He's gone beyond where he can pull it back now. So he was punching her full force. It was said full force in the face, all over. Grown man. And then he began beating her. He took off his belt then, and I've seen the belt. It's thick black leather belt. And he began beating her with that. And he was saying, while he was beating her, he was saying, this is for your own good. What am I going to do with you? Now, I've no doubt he weren't saying it like I am. He was probably screaming at her. But that's what he was saying. And she screamed for Nixzmary's. You know, Mom. She screamed for her to help her. She didn't. How many stories am I going to do where these moms are just sitting back and watching this go on as discipline? And then he wasn't done. He then strips her. He strips her and he brings her into the bathroom. And he runs cold water into the bath. And then he begins dunking her head under the water over and over. And she's still, as she's being brought up, screaming for her mum to help her. And don't forget, they're in a different room. The kids and Nixzmary are in a different room because she's not there to help her daughter. So she's in a different room. And they said all they could hear was this screaming and this banging in there. And then they hear an almighty bang. And what that was, as he slammed her head into the bathtub. And she falls to the floor. And he picks her up. But down to nothing, I don't think she had much on. Wet, emaciated, and beaten. And picks her up and brings her into that rat-infested hole of a room they've been keeping her in, and just throws her onto the floor. okay? And it said she lay in the fetal position in agony. She would have been agony, and she was moaning. And she was calling for her mum, and she just kept on saying, Mummy, Mummy, don't leave me. And she still didn't go to her. She still didn't help her. And so on the 12th of January 2006 at 4:30 a.m, okay? Oh, and just as an FYI, this was the date. Now, it was supposed to be the 11th of January 2006 that CPS Child Services was supposed to go round to the house. But for one reason or another, they decided to leave it until the 12th. Had they gone on the 11th, they might have saved this little girl. I don't know, but they might have. So the 12th of January 2006, 4:30 a.m. And Nixzmary, I don't know why she's bothered, but she goes in to check on Nixzmary. And she finds her face up and cold and broken. She had died in agony alone on that rotten so-called bedroom floor. Now 911 are called. Never get this, how they think they're just going to be able to, no one's going to notice, no one's going to see. And when the paramedics come in, they're mortified. They're so upset. They're so upset what they see. They see this little half-naked, emaciated child on the floor with bruises head to toe, abrasions, contusions, all over her. There's ligature marks around her wrists and her ankles as well that aren't lost on the paramedics. They see that as well. And this is from where she's been wrapped, tied to the school chair. I've seen the ligature marks. I've seen the photos. They're horrific. They're Now, when Nixzmary is brought in and the pathologist obviously performs the autopsy, said that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and it was a hemorrhage. And it said that the pain she would have been in while she was lying on that floor would have been from headache to nausea to hallucination to respiratory problems, and then she would have died. That would have took hours. I've gone very quick through that process. That would have took hours. She was 7. And the pathologist said it was, the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and child abuse syndrome. Okay. At her death, she weighed 36 pounds, 2.5 stone. She was 7. Average 7-year-old is about 50 pound. She was 36 pound. The real one, when the pathologist done obviously the autopsy, also found signs that this little girl had been raped. Not once, numerous. There was, with regards to the police when they were in the apartment and they were getting evidence and everything else. Sorry, I fast-tracked there. Nixzmary and Caesar are arrested and charged straight away with second-degree murder and child endangerment, okay? So when they're in the apartment, the police, and they're getting their evidence together, they find blood all over the walls, all over that apartment, which was found to obviously be Nixzmary's. Everywhere, okay? There was blood found under Caesar's fingernails, on his belt. There was blood on the twine. Sorry, it was called twine that was used to tie the door, to tie her to the school chair. There was duct tape with blood all over it that was found in the bin in the bedroom, that she'd also been restrained with. There was blood on a little girl's pillow, on a blanket, on a little girl's plastic belt. There was blood in the litter box that she'd been using as a toilet. There's blood everywhere. All this child's blood. Now, when she was buried, little Nixzmary, okay, there is a photo. These photos are online. Do I suggest you look for them? No, not really. You can, but there is an open casket at her funeral. She's in her little communion dress. She looks beautiful. She looks at peace. She does. Now, you see the coffin, you see her with a little communion dress on, hundreds of flowers surrounding her. But the emotions at her funeral were so high. I mean, one of Caesar's sisters turned up to the funeral, and, you know, there was two sides of the families. You know, it was bedlam, you know, and there was, I don't think it actually got physical there, but it was said that it was very close, just mere feet from where this little girl's lying. It was really, the emotions were very high. Now, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who was mayor of New York at the time, he attended her funeral because he, again, wanted to know what had gone on and what, you know, what's this happened and changes will be made. As I always say, okay, as we always know is going to be said. Now, little Nixzmary was buried at Cypress Hills Cemetery, and that was exactly where 10 years previous, little Eliza Iscardo, who died under very, very similar circumstances, had died 10 years previous. She was also buried there. Just so sad. The photo of her, it's very upsetting because she genuinely does look like she's asleep. She does. So the trial for these two crossings begins on the 16th of January 2008. Okay. Now, Caesar's defence, defence attorney, Schwartz, his name was, cretin as well, vile, tried to blame a lot of it on Nixzmary herself. How can you do that, you ask? Well, I will tell you. He'd say she used to bully her siblings, and he said, you know, you're seeing this man here, and we're talking about this little 7-year-old who was 36 pounds, but, you know, she would have been much bigger than her siblings who she was bullying. What? And then the yogurt. Now, the yogurt, I personally believe she was given that yogurt. I don't think she'd have, given everything that had been going on, I don't think she went and took that yogurt. I don't. But it was found in her room. Okay, that it was only half eaten. Okay, it was in her room. And he said some people can't afford yogurt. It might seem it was only yogurt, but there was 6 children in that house, and some people can't afford yogurt. And this man was just trying to make sure everyone got what was theirs, and that yogurt wasn't hers. This is a defence lawyer. Sorry, a lawyer. And I know you have to defend your client, but my God. He said she was out of control, and he was a family man. Brought out a mug where it said world's best dad. Someone that God knows who gave him. And he just said he was a strict disciplinarian. I understand that. But actually, it was all Nixzmary's. It was her. It was her that did it. she did the final blow that killed Nixzmary. Okay, so the whole trials were both lawyers blaming each other's clients. It was a from what I can see, it was a circus. It was a complete show. Okay, and now Caesar's defense even brought forward, okay, Nixzmary had been pregnant, okay, and she'd miscarried, all right, and she'd kept the fetus in a glass jar in her bedroom. I don't know what that's about, but she'd kept it in her bedroom, yeah. And that was brought forward by Caesar's defense to say, listen, look, she's crazy, look what she did, look what she was doing, look what she was holding on to. This is the stuff that was brought forward. But there was someone else that came forward, and it was a witness who had been in Rikers Island with Nixzmary. Okay, I've heard that this witness was told this by Nixzmary, and I've heard that she read it in some journals or some notes that Nixzmary had made. But this witness comes forward and speaks on behalf of Caesar's attorney, Caesar's defense, and it was to say that Nixzmary had beaten her daughter because she'd caught not Caesar forcing her child to give him oral sex. No. She'd caught her daughter giving her man oral sex on more than one occasion. She'd saw her daughter as competition. She was 7 years old, and she was being abused in every way, emotionally, physically, sexually. This girl, and that was your mind frame. Now, this is what came forward. Of course, Nixzmary said, no, that didn't happen. I didn't write that down. But, we do know that Nixzmary was raped. So, is it a far stretch that he was making her do that too? Now, if she caught, I haven't seen anything definitive to say that she did walk in on a few occasions as well. But given the torture this child was being put through, not just from him, it wasn't just him. Nixzmary was handy with Nixzmary too. She'd actually given her a black eye. She'd given her own daughter a black eye over this time period. So it's not a far stretch to think that this did happen, okay? And it was also said that she would call Nixzmary Diablo, which is devil in Spanish. And both sides just carried on blaming each other. It was just back and forth, okay? Now, the pictures from the apartment and the autopsy was shown to the jury. I have seen a couple of them myself. There's a huge bruise on this little girl's neck. It covers her entire back of her neck. It's black. There's obviously marks on her ankles that, as I mentioned, I'd seen from her being tied very, very deep. Bruises on her face, and two huge black eyes. And she was so skinny. The photos that you can see online over at at Halloween, and there's another one, is nothing compared to the state she's in this autopsy photo. Nothing. She looks like a different child. you see pictures of the twine on the lock, and you know the chairs brought in to the trial as well. Awful looking chair, just vile. And then they show that on the 9th of January 2006, so 3 days before she died, the CCTV that shows Caesar, Nixzmary, and the other kids shopping at Target, and they're buying toys, slime and what, them little cars, them little Hot Wheels cars, and sweets at Target 3 days before she died, which means she was at home, probably beaten. She'd been beaten for a long time. And all it shows is that she wasn't with them. But given the damage to this child, it was obvious that that's why they'd left her at home. Or they just didn't, would they have brought her out anyway? Now, on the 18th of March 2008, Caesar is found guilty. His sentence was 29 years. On the 12th of November 2008, Nixzmary is also found guilty. She's given 43 years. She had extra charges for, it was classed as the tying her, because it was said that it was her that was tying her to the chair. Now, she did appeal it, and it did get reduced to 33 years to 36 years. That's 10 years off. So, now the judge at the trial, I'll tell you what the judge said to her. And he says, "You may not have delivered the final blow, but were it not for your failure to act, Nixzmary Brown would probably not have died from that blow. She gasped for air, moaning, and called for you twice until she died. You, Mrs. Santiago, ignored the desperate calls and left this little 7-year-old alone, and you did nothing." And she had no response. None. No response. No tears. No nothing in that courtroom. There was nothing from her. Of course, you know, changes are made, and you know, some of the child services agents that were coming out or were supposed to come out, they were disciplined. Apparently there was 10 of them all involved, got disciplined and everything else. We know it doesn't change anything. You know, I could go into, there's so many details about what they wanted to do, and I believe there was a law brought in. Actually, yes, there was a law brought in called Nixzmary's Law. I will mention that. That ensured that if a child dies at the hands of a parent, it will be an automatic first-degree murder charge instead of this second degree. So that does get brought in, and I think it automatic life sentence, I believe. But other than that, it's something I've said 1,000 times on these stories. Now, there was something else that really didn't sit right with me. Nixzmary's biological dad, okay, Abdurrahman Mian, okay, sorry, but Abdurrahman Mian, okay. Now, if you remember, he did not want Nixzmary to continue with the pregnancy, okay. He didn't want to. He didn't want a child, right? To the point where she left so she could go on to have Nixzmary, all right? And the first time he actually sees his daughter is at her funeral, right? That's the first time he sees her. Now, Michael Brown, who had brought her up for more years than Caesar and this so-called biological dad had anything to do with that, he was just devastated. He was disgusted at child services. He laid the blame 100% at them, which, yes, had they gone and sorted this, yes, this wouldn't have happened, but let's remember who did it. But I understand his frustration, his anger. But this biological dad, who, like I say, hadn't seen her until the day of her funeral, he was awarded $750,000 for damages for ACS, the Child Services, not protecting her. He got awarded that money. I was a bit like, when I saw that, I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that. So I'm just going to mention it because that's what I found out. But I don't know how I feel about that bit at all. But that was the heartbreaking Nixzmary Brown story. Just awful. Just very, very sad story. Really sad. Beyond sad, just awful. And like I say, if you do look at the photos I have prepared you, they are awful. Okay? But thank you so much for joining me. I am here every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. I was going to say, yes, I'm not here now for 2 weeks, and I'll be back on the 8th of July, Tuesday the 8th of July, so that's when I'll be back. But there will be stories going up on my pre-recorded videos from the lives at the weekends, so I will try and make sure that a couple of those do go up. But thank you so much for joining me, and if you want to subscribe, I'd appreciate it. But other than that, thank you so much for joining. Take care. Thank you.